In the dim light of dawn, a figure lay still beneath a thin, tattered blanket. The air was cold and biting, gripping him like an unwelcome friend. It felt like the very atmosphere conspired against his comfort, whispering secrets of dread that chilled him to the bone. As the first bright rays of sunlight filtered through the dusty window, sneaking into the corners of the room, a creeping discomfort washed over Caleb, a young man trapped in a moment he didn't understand. The sensation began as a dull ache in his limbs but quickly transformed into a blood-curdling realization that thrummed through him like a haunting melody. With a sudden start, Caleb woke, grinding his teeth against the fear that wrapped around him like a shroud. The world felt different, strange in ways he couldn't articulate. Something was off, and it gnawed at him, waking him like a bad dream that wouldn't let go. Caleb's limbs tingled oddly, as if they were no longer under his control. When he tried to stretch, intending to shake off the odd sensations prickling at him, an overwhelming and unsettling pain shot through his body. It was sharp and cruel, making him gasp and immediately look down in disbelief. What he saw sent horror crashing through him like a tidal wave. His arms had twisted at unnatural angles, limbs becoming grotesque imitations of themselves. One elbow pointed left, while the other bent backward at alarming proportions. Caleb's heart raced as the truth became unmistakable. While he slept, something or someone had done this to him. Panic surged through him, gripping tight enough to squeeze the breath from his throat. It felt as if shadows held him in an icy vice, cutting off hope and clarity. "What's happening to me?" he whispered into the stillness, but no answer came, only the silence that answered back with a mocking echo. Shadows danced along the walls, dark figures that seemed to lean closer, pulling at the edges of his sanity. His heart pounded in his chest, the rhythm becoming frantic, almost wild as he tried to push himself up from the bed. The old wooden frame creaked under the weight of his contorted body, each movement sending jolts of agony rattling through his bones as if they were protesting against the very act of movement. The pain was a grim reminder of his altered form. Caleb swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cold floor against his distorted feet. It was like standing on ice, shocking and raw. He knew he had to escape this nightmare, to break free from the chains of fear that bound him. With all the strength he could muster, he pushed himself to stand. As he rose, pressure in his joints snapped and crackled, each sound resonating like a sinister echo in a forsaken tomb. Every bone felt like it was waging war against him, trying to keep him down, but he refused to surrender. With a desperate lurch, he stumbled forward, leaning against the wall for support. His mind raced, grappling with the horrifying reality of his condition, which loomed like a dark cloud above him. Everything felt wrong, and an unmistakable fear nested deep in the pit of his stomach, like a wild animal ready to pounce. He felt hunted, and the instinct to flee surged within him. As he staggered down the dim hallway, Caleb caught a glimpse of himself in the cracked mirror hanging by the wall. His reflection was a horrifying mockery of a human being, a macabre display of twisted limbs and contorted features that he could barely recognize. The right side of his face appeared pulled too tightly, as if it were wearing a sinister smile. In contrast, the left side was sunken and desolate, shadows casting eerie marks along his cheekbone. For a fleeting moment, he thought the reflection grinned back at him, unsettling and cruel, but he quickly stumbled back from the mirror, feeling sweat bead on his forehead, horror drenching his skin like ice water. The shadows below the mirror seemed to stretch and slink away, pulsating like a living organism, alive with malice. "Get out!" he screamed, the fear spilling over in a frantic plea. His heart raced as he lurched toward the door, desperate to flee this claustrophobic prison that had morphed into a chamber of horror filled with darkness. Each step sent fresh waves of agony through his contorted frame, but the visceral need to escape overpowered the pain clawing at him. As he reached for the doorknob, a chilling realization slithered through him. He could hear something lurking just outside. It was a guttural sound, low and unfathomable, as if something ancient and demonic feasted upon the silence surrounding him. The noise slithered into his ears, unsettling and foreboding, making goosebumps rise on his skin. Caleb hesitated. A part of him froze with terror while another, driven by desperation, pushed him onward. He twisted the doorknob fiercely and flung the door open, stepping into the dim hallway. The hallway stretched out before him, long and shadowy, seeming to suffocate under its weight of silence. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his twisted feet was like a shout, reminding him that something was very, very wrong. Where was everyone? Where had they all gone? Memories of laughter and warmth, the very essence of family, faded away, swallowed by the grim silence that saturated the air. Caleb pressed forward, fear coiling tightly around him like a snake. As he turned a corner, Caleb stumbled across an open door. It belonged to his brother's room. Inside, darkness loomed so heavily it felt almost alive. The walls were adorned with posters of heroes, larger-than-life characters who inspired courage and strength. That felt like a distant dream now, a flickering candle in a stormy night. Caleb peered cautiously into the abyss of shadows, his breath hitching as the stench of rot wafted toward him, foul and cloying, wrapping itself around his throat like a noxious fog. It blanketed the room in a suffocating dread that made his stomach churn. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye, something shifting in the corner of the room. Caleb's heart raced as he squinted into the darkness. There, encased in shadows, was a figure he recognized. It was his brother, Tristan. But he was not alone. Wisps of shadow coiled around him like serpents, wrapping around his limbs and his body. Oh, his body. It was a horrific tableau of limbs, twisted and contorted beyond the boundaries of possibility. Tristan, Caleb called out, his voice trembling with uncertainty, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. But the figure didn't move. The shadows around him pulsed ominously, as if they were alive, thriving on the fear that filled the room. Caleb compelled himself to step closer, pushing aside the bile that rose in his throat, knowing he could not bear to see his brother like this. But as he approached, his heart sank. His brother was not himself. Tristan's eyes were vacant pools, void of any warmth, reflecting nothing save for the unholy darkness that now consumed him. A hollow shiver washed over Caleb as he stepped back, retreating from the horror unfolding before him. The darkness swirling around Tristan was not just a shadow, it felt alive, menacing, with sinister intent. Panic took grip of Caleb's heart, making it thud painfully against his ribcage. He had to escape, he had to find help. But as he stumbled back out into the hallway, he felt something inhuman lingering in the distance, a presence, ravenous and starved, that thrived on fear and torment. It was watching him, its gaze core heavy and patient, like a predator savoring its prey. Caleb's breath quickened, and he could taste the tang of adrenaline in his mouth. He moved down the corridor, each shadow feeling like it was crawling closer, tightening around him like a noose. The old paintings lining the walls seemed to leer at him, their subjects' eyes following every movement with malevolence. Caleb suddenly felt like a mere pawn in a game played by an unseen force, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. "Where are you?" he whispered into the silence, hoping against hope for a reply, for a flicker of humanity among the encroaching darkness. But the only answer was the creaking of the floorboards, the wind howling through cracks in the walls like a ghost lamenting its fate. Caleb moved forward, stumbling slightly, every instinct telling him to run, to flee from whatever horror was creeping closer. Then, amidst the oppressive silence, he heard a low whispering sound. It was a fragile noise, almost like voices woven together in quiet agony. Help us, they seemed to sigh, a chilling echo that reverberated in his mind and clung to the edges of his thoughts. He faltered, uncertainty flooding through him like icy water. Gritting his teeth against the rising fear, Caleb pressed on, his heart pounding like a war drum. He remembered the stories he had heard growing up about creatures hiding in shadows, about spirits lost and longing for what could not be. But he had thought those just tales meant to scare children, stories spun from imagination to entertain, a way for parents to keep their kids in line. "Stay away, leave us be," he shouted defiantly, the fear sweeping through him so sharply he could hardly think straight. But the shadows only laughed, a sound that echoed cruelly in the empty hall. It was a mocking amusement that promised nothing good. He could almost feel them closing in, creeping along the walls, whispering secrets he was not meant to hear. The echoes of laughter morphed into echoes of cries, a symphony of sorrow that tugged at the corners of his heart. Caleb's resolve hardened. If he was to face whatever lurked in the depths of this darkened nightmare, he would need to find the strength he wasn't sure he had left. He had to find his family, his brother, and unravel the mystery of what had happened to them all. Driven by desperation, he stumbled toward the stairs, each painful step feeling like a pact with something ancient and hungry. The very air felt like it was charged with energy, like a storm was brewing just beyond his reach. "I won't let you take me," Caleb shouted at the shadows that dared to loom closer. The shadows rippled and flickered, as if they were considering his challenge. But deep inside, Caleb knew he was racing against an unseen clock, running toward a fate he didn't understand. Whether he would find his family or more horrors waiting in the dark, he was determined to confront the truth. Lifting his chin, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for the unknown as he stepped into the yawning dark. He would fight against it. He would not be simply a pawn in someone else's game. And with that thought, the haunting laughter erupted into a chorus of despair, echoing off the walls, sending shivers down his spine as he disappeared into the inky blackness ahead. Only time would tell if the shadows would devour him or if he would emerge from this horror alive, ready to reclaim his life and the light that had been so cruelly snatched away. The days that followed Caleb's plunge into despair felt like being trapped in a never-ending nightmare. Everything around him was a blur of pain and confusion, colors faded and sounds muffled. Inside his darkened room, Caleb crouched in a corner, feeling small and lost, every surface of the room looming over him like dark clouds in a storm. It was as if the walls were closing in, pressing against him from all sides. He trembled, wanting nothing more than to escape the cruel grasp of the unseen tormentor lurking in the shadows. He tried to move, to run away from the suffocating fear that haunted him, but each attempt left his body feeling heavy and sore, as if an invisible weight were holding him down. Shadows surrounded him, morphing and twisting into unsettling shapes, flickering and dancing in the dim light. Caleb felt twisted in a web of anguish, an agony that wrapped around his heart and squeezed tightly. His own reflection in the mirror across the room felt alien and grotesque, a haunting reminder of the Caleb that once was, a boy full of dreams and laughter. But now, he was just a shell of that boy, lost in an endless abyss. The image in the mirror mocked him, its twisted grin sending a shiver down his spine. He pressed his palms against his ears, trying desperately to block out the whispers that echoed around him. They floated through the air like ghostly fingers caressing his mind, soft and sinister at first. They started as a haunting lullaby that turned into an overwhelming symphony of dread. "Turn back," they hissed, their voices filled with malice and shadows. "You have no choice." The fear clawed at his insides, poisoning his thoughts. He clenched his eyes shut, wishing for the whispers to stop, but the sound grew louder and more menacing, scratching and clawing at his sanity. The voices felt oddly familiar. They echoed the laughter of friends who had long since disappeared, reminders of a time when joy filled the air. What had happened to the love that had once thrived in this very room? Caleb's mind spiraled into paranoia, a jumble of frantic thoughts swirling like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. He was sure he was not alone in this suffering. He felt a deep dread that something darker was circling him, watching from a distance, waiting for a moment of weakness. Every night, as darkness crept back into the corners of his mind, he felt a phantom touch, disconcerting and cold. These were not mere shadows, they had taken on a life of their own, grotesque figures shimmering at the edge of his vision, taunting him with their contorted faces and eerie smiles, hungry for his fear. "Join us," they murmured, their voices weaving into a sinister chorus that sent waves of terror crashing over him. One particularly haunting night, amid the suffocating darkness, Caleb noticed it. The shadows writhed just beyond his sight, slithering like snakes around the fragile edges of his sanity. They seemed to thrive off his fear, feeding on the despair that consumed him, like parasites devouring their host. Each time he mustered the courage to look, they withdrew, teasing him, but he could still feel their cold presence clawing at his insides, desperately trying to merge with him. It was maddening, a question that gnawed at him constantly. What did they want from him? Caleb's desperate search for answers led him back to his brother, Tristan. His need to find Tristan had become an all-consuming obsession, a final glimmer of hope in a world spiraling into insanity. The bond of brotherhood was a light flickering in a dark tunnel, urging him to press on even when all felt lost. He followed the once familiar path to Tristan's room, yet with each step, dread coiled in his stomach like a serpent. The shadows flickered ominously around him, their whispers growing louder, transforming into a terrifying symphony that accompanied his every move. With his heart racing and his breath caught in his throat, he pushed open the door, the hinges creaking ominously as if warning him of the horrors that awaited inside. The room was unchanged, yet it felt denser, a palpable heaviness hanging in the air. A musty scent, like moldy sheets and stale air, enveloped him, more potent than he remembered. Caleb stepped inside, his heart pounding as he searched for any sign of the brother he once knew, hoping against hope that something human remained beneath the monstrous exterior. "Tristan," he called softly, almost as if afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile moment. His voice echoed around the room, trembling with uncertainty as he moved closer to the figure curled in the corner. The twisted form turned to him, and Caleb's heart sank deeper than he thought possible. What was left of Tristan lay there, eyes as black as night, lost in a writhing mass of shadows that clung to him like a second skin. "Caleb," Tristan spoke, his voice barely more than a hoarse whisper, jagged and broken. Each word seemed to slice through the air around them, sending shivers racing down Caleb's spine. "You shouldn't have come here. They want you." A chill gripped Caleb's heart as he stepped forward, his instincts screaming at him to retreat, to run back to safety, but the urge to save his brother was overwhelming. "Fight them, Tristan, please," he urged, stretching out a trembling hand toward the twisted figure that wore his brother's face. But with his plea came a grotesque undertow, a shiver that threatened to pull him into the darkness. Tristan's eyes began to glisten with something resembling humanity, thin slivers that flickered beneath the suffocating darkness. "I can't hold them back, Caleb. Join us." The words rolled from Tristan's lips like a dark spell, and the shadows thickened around him, devouring their surroundings and dragging Caleb closer to the gaping maw of despair. The darkness slithered up Caleb's arms, swift and merciless, as panic tightened its grip around his heart. He dropped to his knees, terror flooding through him and clawing at his throat. Overwhelmed with a deep sense of helplessness, a gut-wrenching realization seeped into Caleb's mind. He could feel the shadows trying to intertwine with his very soul. With horror, he stared into his brother's abyss-like eyes. A terrifying vision of himself writhing beneath their weight consumed his thoughts. They would twist him, reshape him until he was unrecognizable, until he was nothing but a puppet in their hands. But could he save Tristan? Deep down, a part of him knew the truth: he couldn't. In that moment, with terror squeezing his heart tighter, Caleb stumbled backward, his panicked cries clawing at the air like a desperate plea for help. The shadows lunged at him, engulfing him in an endless void, dragging him toward the malignant heart of darkness. "Leave him," he shouted, his voice breaking as the shadows clawed at him. Tristan's figure flickered, fading in and out of view like a dream slipping away. "You're my brother. No, don't let this happen." But the shadows only grew more insistent, peeling away the last remnants of hope he clung to. They devoured his thoughts, whispered unspeakable truths, and laughed at the fragility of his sanity. The room around him began to warp and twist, the familiar walls bending and contorting as the shadows siphoned away his light, merging into a singular darkness that blotted out everything else. The darkness seized him entirely, engulfing him in a void that threatened to swallow him whole. The last traces of his humanity slipped away, devoured by the grotesque entity that had taken his brother and now haunted his every step. The shadows had claimed him, entwining themselves within him, feasting on his fear and despair, relentless and unyielding. In those suffocating moments, Caleb realized there was no escape. He was ensnared in a web of darkness, hopelessly tangled in a nightmare from which he might never awaken. But even in this endless pit of despair, a flicker of defiance sparkled in Caleb's heart. He remembered the laughter of simpler times, the bond he shared with Tristan, the warmth of their childhood adventures. Could that light endure even in the depths of this madness? With a surge of determination, he fought against the shadows that grasped at his mind, mustering every ounce of strength to free himself from their relentless grasp. "Tristan," he roared, his voice a battle cry piercing through the darkness. "You are my brother. We are stronger than this." The shadows wavered, their grip loosening ever so slightly. Somewhere deep within the darkness, he sensed a flicker of recognition in Tristan's eyes, a brief moment when humanity reasserted itself amidst the chaos. "Remember the games we played?" Caleb urged, clinging to that light. "The adventures we shared. We can defeat this together." For one brief moment, the shadows hesitated, as if caught off guard by the flame of hope Caleb's words ignited. "Caleb," Tristan's voice emerged, a whisper full of conflict. The grotesque shape of despair flickered once more, and Caleb could see the glimmers of the brother he adored lurking beneath the surface. In that kaleidoscope of flickering shadows, hope sparked brightly. Despite the overwhelming darkness, The bond of brotherhood had the power to cut through even the densest of veils. As Caleb battled against the tightening grip of despair, he clung fiercely to that bond, refusing to let fear dictate their fate. No matter how far he had fallen into madness, he would fight for his brother. Together, they would navigate the twisting shadows and emerge into the light once more. Together, they would remember who they were and reclaim their destinies from the very darkness that sought to devour them whole. With a roar that echoed beyond the confines of his mind, Caleb plunged into battle against the shadows. In the depths of despair, he dared to dream of hope, believing that through their shared strength, they could reclaim their lives. For that glimmer was worth fighting for, the light of their brotherhood in a world shrouded in darkness. As the days melted into nights, Caleb felt as if he were drifting through a strange world filled with helplessness and horror. The once warm and inviting walls of his home twisted and contorted until they were unrecognizable. The colors that had once brightened his room faded to unsettling shades of gray and black, like shadows stretching out to reach him. Memories, those precious flickers of happiness from the past, danced in and out of his mind like dying embers struggling against the wind. The memories were tantalizing and cruel, taunted by the sinister whispers that floated through the air around him. It felt as if shadows, hungry and alive, wrapped themselves around him, squeezing tighter, waiting patiently for the last sliver of hope in his heart to flicker out completely. Every morning was the same gut-wrenching performance, a grotesque show that felt like a cruel joke. With each dawn, new shapes of agony appeared, contorting his body and spirit in ways that left him gasping for breath. Caleb felt like a marionette, dancing unwillingly in a dark and twisted play, with an audience of phantoms and despair watching him, relishing his suffering. It didn't matter how hard he tried to escape. The shadows only tightened their grip, dragging him deeper into an unbearable dance where every step led to more pain. In Caleb's relentless quest for peace, he found himself genuinely frightened of the mirror that hung in the corner of his room. Once, it had been a window to his reflection, showing him a familiar face full of curiosity and joy. Now, that broken shard of glass merely reflected a monster, a twisted, deformed shadow of humanity that stared back at him from another realm. It seemed to take pleasure in his misery, cackling like a deranged spirit each time he dared to glance its way. "You belong to me," the reflection sneered, its voice echoing with unsettling chords of insanity that twisted around his mind like a serpent. "Fight it, Caleb," he screamed, but the shadows responded with laughter, their voices sweet, smooth, and laced with malice. "You will never escape us. You will become one of us." Despair washed over him like a tsunami crashing against rocks, filling his lungs with sadness that felt sharp like shards of glass. Each twist of his being reminded him of who he used to be, Caleb, a boy full of dreams and laughter, now trapped in a haunting nightmare that wrapped around him like a choking vine, squeezing tighter and tighter as if trying to snap him in two. One lonely night, longing for understanding, Caleb made a shaky decision. He forced himself to return to his brother Tristan's room. The air felt heavy with an oppressive silence, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching, waiting for the right moment to pounce. With each step across the threshold, the shadows seemed to ripple with excitement, wrapping around him like the cold breath of ghosts. The darkness loomed larger as he walked into the void, swallowing any warmth or light that had been left in the house. In the corner of the room, his brother sat, his form twisted and lost within the depths of night. The memories of who Tristan used to be glimmered faintly in his eyes, fighting to break free from the monstrous clutches that held him captive. Caleb felt a surge of hope bubbling up inside him. "Tristan," he whispered, his voice shaky yet yearning. "I can help you." But Tristan's vacant stare was all-consuming, his humanity wrapped tightly within the throes of an unseen monster. The shadows intertwined deeper with Tristan, revealing nothing but disturbing madness within their grasp. Caleb, his heart pounding, reached out. "We can break free," he urged, pulling at the threads of their bond. "If just for a moment. We are stronger together." There was desperation in his voice, a wish to awaken the last remnants of the brother he loved. Tristan's humanity flickered like a dying flame, struggling against the overwhelming shadows. "You must leave," he gasped, his voice strained, a lifeline thrown into a storm. "They will take you. You can't follow me into the darkness." The shadows shrieked in response, their soulless whispers mingling with Caleb's heartbeat, sending waves of terror crashing through the air around them. Caleb felt them tighten their grip, whispers filled with deceiving promises of peace if only he would surrender his humanity. Panic twisted in Caleb's veins like poison, burning through his mind. Fleeing from the chaos, he stumbled backward, his heart pounding a wild rhythm as the shadows united, twisting into grotesque forms. Faces that reached out to him with clawed hands. "Join us, Caleb, become whole, embrace the darkness." The voices coiled around him, cruel and twisted, pulling at any glimmer of reason he had left within him. Tension filled the air like a living thing, suffocating and thick, and he could hear the desperate cries of lost souls crying out for help. "No," he howled, tears spilling over as he staggered back, heart racing with disbelief. "I won't let you win." But the darkness responded, gnawing at the edges of his mind, tugging at his deepest fears. He felt their cold touch wrapping around him, ready to pull him into a vortex of despair. With every second that passed, the shadows wound tighter, whispering malicious secrets just beyond his understanding. They crafted a symphony of sorrow, a haunting song meant to rob him of his will to fight. Tristan's form flickered and danced on the edge of the void, wavering like a candle caught in a tempest. "You cannot save me, Caleb. You don't understand." His voice echoed through the swirling miasma, each word a fragile bridge across a chasm of hopelessness. "Run. Get away from this cursed place." But Caleb couldn't leave. A powerful bond clung him to this nightmarish existence, ensnared by the very darkness that consumed his brother. The shadows recoiled slightly at the fire igniting within Caleb's heart, but with each shudder of resistance, they tightened their hold, pulling him deeper into their wicked web. He could feel them twisting his very identity, reshaping him into something monstrous, relishing in every cry of anguish that slipped past his lips. The shadows danced around him, filled with joy, buoyed by the despair that threatened to drown him. With each agonizing twist of his limbs, Caleb felt his reality fading. It was a nightmarish plunge into darkness, a deep well that swallowed him whole, leaving behind only a shadow of the boy he used to be. "Help me, Tristan," he cried out, desperation clawing at his throat. "Don't let them take me." But the shadows pressed in, feasting on his despair, merging him with the loss and darkness that had overtaken the once bright and bustling home. He felt his mind fracture, aches reverberating through everything he held close. He could barely hear himself above the chaos, lost amid the cries and the laughter. Shadows twisted at the edges of his vision, pulling him into a grotesque realm filled with nothing but terror. "Fight," he roared into the darkness. The words felt small and weak, swallowed whole by the overwhelming tide of pain. Just then, a flicker of light broke through the thick curtain of black surrounding him, a faint memory of laughter between him and Tristan, their adventures, the times spent playing games and sharing secrets. Whatever twisted nightmare had taken residence in his brother, it couldn't erase those precious moments, could it? "Tristan," Caleb shouted, desperation fueling his voice. "Remember us. Remember the fun we had." He focused on that laughter, pushing back against the shadows that clawed at his mind. "We can beat this. I won't let this darkness take you." With each passing second, he felt the shadows shifting, flickering as if uncertain now, almost like they were retreating. Could it be that love and memory had the power to drive back the encroaching darkness? Hope surged within him, a flickering flame striving against an overwhelming wind. Together, they could fight. Caleb felt renewed strength surging through him again, warming the edges of his heart. Tristan's form pulsed with the same light Caleb had ignited, battling against the suffocating grip of the malevolent shadows. "Caleb, His brother's voice quivered but held some weight, some strength. We can fight." "Yes," Caleb shouted, energy coursing through him like wildfire. "Together, we can push them away." The shadows screamed in surprise, the malicious glee fading to a haunting snarl, trying desperately to regain their grip on the brothers. With a force stronger than he could have ever imagined, Caleb reached out, his hands finding their way through the murky darkness. He grasped hold of Tristan, feeling the flicker of his brother within the chaos, the remnants of joy and love meant to sustain them. As the shadows coiled around them, Caleb focused harder, igniting every flicker of the past, replaying every laugh, every adventure, and every moment that bonded them together in unwavering strength. Little by little, the darkness began to unravel around them. The grotesque forms that once delighted in their suffering began to shriek as they were pushed back, legions of shadows retreating against the onslaught of light and love. "You will not take my brother." Caleb roared, his voice ringing clear as the weight of despair fell away. Tristan's features began revealing themselves from behind the veil of shadow, flickers of pain replaced by determination. "I can feel you, we can win," he cried, as if awakening from a long and terrible slumber. As the shadows howled and writhed, a profound silence wrapped around them, overwhelming the whispers that had filled the air with fear. United now, Caleb felt the flames of resolve burning bright. "We're stronger than the darkness," he declared. Together, they pushed forward into light, navigating through chaotic shadows where only despair had reigned. Love, hope, and brotherhood filled the air around them, igniting a brilliant display of luminescence that exploded forth, shattering the remaining darkness into shards that fell like rain. With one final surge, the shadows dissipated entirely, unable to withstand the might of their bond. The brothers stepped into the warmth of light, heartbeats synchronized, smiles gracing their faces for the first time in ages. Together, they had faced the insatiable darkness and had emerged on the other side, hand in hand. The world dimmed around Caleb, fading into an unsettling gloom that pressed heavily against his chest. It felt as if reality itself were creating an invisible wall that was squeezing him hard, making it hard to breathe. Gone was the vibrant warmth of life. Instead, a suffocating blanket of despair covered everything, wrapping around him like a dark fog. The shadows were no longer hiding in the corners. They were dancing freely, flitting about like sinister marionettes, celebrating his surrender to them. Within him, Caleb felt a hollowness, a hollow spot in his mind that echoed softly. Memories of laughter and warmth seemed distant, as though they were fading like the last light of dawn. Caleb found himself adrift, like a leaf caught in a dark whirlwind. He felt himself being pulled deeper into a swirling abyss, surrendering to the madness that clawed at his heart. It felt as though he were losing pieces of himself, bits and fragments of joy slipping away into the shadowy void. His thoughts twisted and turned in dark spirals and, weighed down by persistent pulses of dread, they pushed away every happy memory that tried to come through the gloom. "You belong with us," the shadows whispered to him in voice soft as silk. "Embrace the shadows." Yet, deep down, Caleb struggled to recall the joy of laughter or the warmth of love. All that remained in this dim reality was a heavy sense of doom that loomed over him, like dark clouds hiding the sun with an insatiable hunger that echoed in the corners of his heart. Days flowed into nights, and nights dragged on endlessly, filled with swirling phantoms that haunted him. There were fleeting moments when he felt tiny sparks of himself, flickers of warmth that dared to shine through the crushing darkness, but, like wisp smoke, they vanished into thin air before he could grab onto them. A part of him, still stubborn, burning with that small, flickering light, struggled against the shadows that wrapped around him, tightening their grip as they fed off his despair. They consumed his very essence, devouring whatever shreds of hope remained within him. Each moment of hardship became a delectable treat for the shadows, who growled hungrily, relishing the taste of his suffering. In this horrible embrace of dark emotions, Caleb felt his mind start to crack. He often saw twisted visions of his brother, Tristan, or what was left of him, a phantom wrapped in shadows, a figure of broken bones and buried sorrow. "Join me, Caleb," he would rasp, his voice a haunting melody mixed with both terror and longing. The echoes of joyful times spent together surged through the deep void, sending shivers racing down Caleb's spine. "Embrace the darkness. Let them take you." Each word broke off another tiny piece of his dwindling hope, feeding the shadows that longed to capture him completely. In those moments, Caleb began to understand something dreadful. The shadows were not just strange phantoms. They came from within him, born from every fear, every regret, and every dark thought that had ever tickled the edges of his mind. They thrived on sorrow and pain. It was then that a chilling realization slinked down his spine. Perhaps the shadows were his own, a reflection of everything he had become. The awful figures swirled around him, their silent laughter echoing in his ears like a war drum beating ominously. The warped faces of people he once cherished, his mother, his father, friends lost along the journey, danced in the shadows. Each time he looked, his heart ached with longing, accompanied by the heavy burden of loss. The shackles built from his own memories began to disintegrate, twisting reality until it became an incomprehensible nightmare, where nothing felt real, in this forsaken realm of distorted souls. Hope, love, joy, each beautiful memory had been devoured, replaced by the insidious darkness weaving around him. Caleb engaged in a final, desperate battle. He raked at the darkness that clawed mercilessly at his throat, biting and tearing at the essence that felt just out of his reach. This time, he swore it, this time he would not give in. A fervent roar erupted from his throat, howling against the encroaching darkness. I will not give in. I will fight. For a brief moment, the shadows recoiled, and a shimmer of determination flickered in his heart, like a candle flickering against a storm. But the haunting shadows were furious. They surged forward, merging into a tide of darkness that lashed against him with violent ferocity. Bending his will, Caleb felt each bone in his body crack, and an agonizing pain radiated throughout him. They shrieked in victory, echoing, "You are hollow, a vessel ready for us." The guttural voice echoed through him, resonating with his deepest fears. There, in the depths of this new prison, Caleb was a marionette, strung and bent, forced to dance with the ghostly figure of his long-lost brother, whose laughter soared around them, matching his own despair. As his spirit dimmed further, Caleb could feel his own body warping. He felt himself reshaping into something sinister, more aligned with the shadows' wickedness. "Let them take you completely," Tristan whispered, his voice winding through the thick darkness, wrapping around Caleb like a soft yet suffocating blanket. "Don't resist. You no longer feel pain. You have found your belonging." It was blasphemy, but the shadows presented this lie as if it were a grand truth. They slithered closer, wrapping around him like thick, dark vines, suffocating him with deceit, assuring him that this cursed existence was all there was. Caleb had been stripped of everything he once held dear, transformed into a puppet made of shadow and despair. There was no fight left within him, just a deafening silence that swirled into endless nothingness, with him merging into the essence of the shadows. He could feel himself slipping away, dissolving into the abyss that had long sought his spirit. And so, he was lost within a realm of tortured whispers and hollow laughter, a canvas painted in hues of desolation, an echoing reminder of the broken boy he had once dared to be. Forever ensnared by the shadows that relished his torment, Caleb became a twisted phantom, nothing but a shadow of his former self, surrendering to the oppressive embrace of oblivion. He was now a mere remnant of hope, never again to bask in the joyful warmth of the sun, never again to feel the precious comfort of love wrapped around him. Every dark corner of this shadowy prison took note of his surrender. He could feel them watching, always watching. Caleb felt as if he had traded his soul for the quiet, funless eternity waiting before him. Gone were dreams of bright futures and simple joys. Those were lost among the twisted branches of darkness that now ruled his thoughts. As Caleb floated in this dreadful void, he began to lose track of time. Moments felt like hours, days blended into weeks, and soon he could not remember the face of his brother, or the feeling of a warm hug, or the sound of laughter, his own laughter. All that was left were the shadows whispering lies to him, always ready to remind him of the darkness he now embodied. Their laughter echoed over him like a terrible song, weaving a spell of despair that seemed unbreakable. The shadows began to share images of the life he'd left behind, flashes of sunshine dancing on the grass, the sweet melody of a warm summer breeze, a glass full of lemonade, and a picnic under the enormous oak tree in the park. Memories washed over him, driving him to fight back, just once more. "I remember," he stammered, his voice faint like a whisper carried away by a gentle wind. But each flicker of hope was met with the chilling laughter of the shadows, drowning him in their darkness. "What do you have to live for?" they hissed. "You are alone. Why fight?" Their words slithered into him, and he felt small, insignificant, just a tiny particle of dust in an expansive universe filled with shadows. Caleb breathed shallowly, still knowing there was a fight left within him. Though the shadows weighed him down, he felt the faintest stirring of his heart, as if a flower was trying to bloom amid the heavy soil surrounding it. It was not much, just a tiny spark, but it was still there, stubborn and unyielding. He steeled his resolve, reaching deep within himself for memories of love, memories that were now only whispers in the darkness. It was now or never. He would not become merely one with the shadows. "I may be alone, but I'm alive," he shouted into the darkness, his voice clearer this time, ringing against the edges of despair. "I refuse to let you take me." For the first time in that oppressive darkness, the shadows hesitated. They began to swirl and retreat, almost as if they were scared of the light emerging from Caleb's heart. He pushed with everything he had, images of his brother, of family, and the beautiful moments they shared like a lifeline guiding him back. With open arms, he reached for that flicker of hope, nurturing it like an ember, urging it to grow. "No, this isn't where I belong," he cried, charging against the tide of shadows that threatened to engulf him entirely. Just when he thought all was lost, in that moment of resilience, he felt the shadows begin to crack, their grip loosening as his courage surged forth like a bright light bursting through a heavy fog. "No more," Caleb roared defiantly, drawing upon the memories that had once filled him with joy. Each memory felt like a small star igniting within him, a symbol of hope, love, and perseverance. For every shadow that threatened to hold him in its grasp, he pushed back with a memory of warmth, a laugh heard long ago, a moment with Tristan that he could not allow to slip away. And as he battled against the oppressive whispers, Caleb felt something shift, a crack forming in the fabric of despair that surrounded him, allowing the sunlight to seep through, chasing away some of the darkness. With a surge of renewed strength, Caleb shouted, "I will not become what you are. I am more than this darkness. I am more than despair." At that moment, he felt an undeniable connection to the world, a tether that anchored him to everything he once held dear. It was fragile, but it was enough to remind him that hope was not entirely lost. The shadows laughed nervously, swirling and twisting around him, but they couldn't hold fast. His heart swelled with the realization that he still had the power to fight, that he could emerge from this darkness yet. So Caleb stood tall in the face of his fears and fought for every ounce of light that still resided within him, for every cherished memory that lit up his heart. Little by little, he reclaimed his spirit from the darkness, and the shadows faltered. As they reeled back, the room brightened just a fraction, enough for Caleb to feel the warmth of hope beginning to swell within him. And just maybe, if he could hold on to that spark, he could awaken to a new dawn, a dawn built on love, joy, and the treasured memories he had almost surrendered. The shadows were powerful, yes, but in Caleb's heart burned something stronger, a flicker of hope that would refuse to dim. With every heartbeat, he reminded himself of who he was and who he would fight to become. "I will find my way back," he vowed, his voice cutting through the darkness like a sword. "I will not let you win."